Hello and welcome to this, the latest in the series of interviews with candidates for the Scottish Parliament in May. Our guest now is Alasdair Allan, who has been the representative for some years. So we'll have to ask him about that and what he's going to do different if he gets in this time. Alasdair Allan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Ian.
Let me say, first of all, you have been the island's MSP since Adam was a boy. It's something like 19 years, isn't it?
It is, now I count it. So I was elected first in 2007, so I think this is the fifth time I've been the candidate.
Right. Why do you do it? I mean, there are other things you could do, I'm sure.
Yes, that is true.
Why?
I hope it's true.
Yeah, why do you do politics?
Well, that's a really interesting place to start. I mean, I have always been interested in politics, and particularly the kind of politics I'm interested in, which is about Scottish independence, since I was a student. But I didn't, as a student, really think I would be a member of the Scottish Parliament because there was not yet the Scottish Parliament. So it was very much a voluntary activity, something I did as a volunteer, as an activist, long before I thought about standing for Parliament. But I was very privileged to be elected in 2007, and it's a job I've taken seriously. I do enjoy the job. It is hard work. For the next 2 weeks, we are sitting in the Parliament until 10 p.m. To get through the legislative programme. There's a huge amount of travelling involved, but it's a great privilege to do, and I'm glad people have chosen me. It's up to people whether they want to choose me again.
Now, in 19 years, there's been ups and downs, I'm sure you'll agree. What do you think about the overall performance of the nationalist government and your own performance? How do you think you have performed in 19 years?
Well, that's a very searching question, or the latter one's a very searching question. It's for others to judge. I'm not the kind of person who's perhaps very good at evaluating myself like that, but I think in terms of take the first question first about what the Scottish Government has achieved. I mean, I think Scottish politics has changed out of recognition, not just because of the election of the SNP in 2007, but I think it's changed since the debate about independence was opened up in 2014. You're right to say there have been ups and downs. I think the SNP is in a much better place now than it was, say, 2 years ago at the elections to the Westminster Parliament, where it would be fair to look back and say that we had a problem, certainly in terms of the election results we were getting. I'm now getting a much better response on the doors now than I was then, and I'm certainly very serious about winning the election here for the SNP. In terms of my own achievements, I mean, the things that give most politicians, I think, the most sense of achievement are actually things that happen locally. I think people think we spend all our time arguing in the chamber of the Parliament.
Well, don't you?
Most of my time locally. So, for instance, in terms of being able to hopefully do things for individual people, I think that side of the job is part of the job that's given me the most satisfaction. And I recently counted this up, but dealt with 7,000 cases, perhaps not all individuals, perhaps the same person was in touch more than once. But 7,000 cases of people who've been in touch with me directly for help in the last 4 years, and that's a very rewarding part of it. But I think also being able to speak up for some of the really distinctive things about the Western Isles, things that perhaps not many other MSPs have a chance to speak up about. So this week I'm trying to amend legislation on crofting, or very often I'm speaking about Gaelic, or raising issues about ferries. So I think part of the job for the MSP in the Western Isles is perhaps to speak up about things that other MSPs don't.
Now, the other face in the corner of the screen is my fellow co-presenter, Donald MacLeod. So I'll hand over to him.
Thank you very much, Ian. Mr. Allan, I'm going to ask two questions, one of which from myself and one from a member of the public to whom I was talking to about interviewing you today. So I'll start with my question first, if that's okay. Regarding Scottish independence, there has been this argument from certain factions outside of the SNP within the nationalist movement, such as with the Alba Party, and to bring an example close to home, a candidate you will be facing in this election, Kenny Mackenzie for the Sovereignty Party, whom we interviewed last week, that the SNP have not done enough since the last Scottish independence referendum in 2014 to push for either another one or has instead focused on other social and economic policies that have been considered by some within the nationalist movement as not beneficial and not as prioritising enough for Scottish independence. What do you say to those that have presented this argument forward, and do you agree or disagree that more needs to be done or can be done?
Well, I'm not really familiar with the Sovereignty Party. All I can say is that I've spent all my adult life campaigning for independence, and it's at the heart of what I do and the reason I do it. I also think the only way to get independence is to have a pro-independence government in Scotland. And although you would expect me to say this, I can't see a way of achieving that other than by voting for the real party of independence, the party that's most likely to form a pro-independence government, and that is the SNP. So the SNP has to do two different things. You're right to point to it. The SNP can't simply be a protest group about independence, important though that protest is. We're also a government. So we have to do both things. So yes, we do have to talk about what's important to people from day to day, whether it's about the difficulties people have heating their house or whether it's about the problems in the economy. And the task we have is to put forward and to explain that, well, these problems would be easier to solve if there were more powers in Scotland. One of the things, I was speaking about people coming to me as individuals locally. One of the big things that people come to me about is the difficulty they have in heating their house. And there's a huge debate to be had about why is it that Scotland doesn't have control over the price of electricity? Why is it Scotland doesn't have control over electricity markets or energy policy or all these things that could be used to give people a better chance of heating their homes? In somewhere like the Western Isles, which, sad to say, has some of the worst fuel poverty in the country. So these things are all connected. So the argument for independence is connected to the day-to-day business of government.
So do you personally think, that these factors have been less beneficial from the SNP's point of view of achieving Scottish independence?
So I think that the SNP has been consistent about the fact that Scotland needs independence and need it urgently. I suppose what's happened in the debate has been that the UK government has consistently adopted this position that it doesn't really matter how people vote in elections in Scotland. It doesn't matter, or it hasn't mattered to them if people have voted parliaments in that are for having a referendum, for people having a choice. The UK government's position for the last few years has been that they will ignore that. I don't think that's a credible position in a democracy. I think the most likely way to cut through that logjam, if that's what people see it as being, is to have a majority SNP government. Because when we did that in 2011, everyone in all parts of the political spectrum had to agree that there was a need for a referendum on independence. So I'm old enough to remember the 1990s when UK government after UK government argued that it didn't really matter how many people in Scotland wanted to have a Scottish Parliament. They weren't getting one. I don't think that was credible eventually, and I don't think it's credible for the UK government to say that they're never going to exceed.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll move on to the question that was sent in from a member of the general public. Now, I'm just going to quote word from word what was said. Don't worry, there's nothing extreme in language, but this is what they said. Why have the SNP been an utter disaster when it comes to some of their projects, such as the resurfacing of the A9 and the ferries?
Well, and when it comes to ferries, what I would say is I don't think anyone disputes the fact that there's been problems with a certain shipyard, but the SNP government has built or is building at the moment 4 ferries in the Turkish shipyard, one of which has been delivered, another one will be on its way soon. There is obviously another ferry still to be delivered in Port Glasgow, and there's a small vessels building programme which is also being commissioned just now. And on top of that, just this week, we've commissioned or have put out to tender a replacement for MV Lord of the Isles. So on ferries, the only solution is to build new ships. I think everyone acknowledges the problems that CalMac have largely been due to the ageing ferry fleet. But the SNP government has put the money into and the effort into replacing that fleet. And 3 or 4 years down the line, a third of the ferry fleet will have been replaced. So I would say that the government is putting its money where its mouth is on that. You mentioned another subject. What was the other subject you mentioned?
The A9.
Roads, the A9. So on the A9, the government has committed to various sections of the A9 to being dualled. I can completely understand the argument that's been made about the fact that the A9 goes back and forth between dual and single carriageway, and that's been raised as an issue around road safety. And so yes, the Scottish Government has committed to various sections of the A9 to be dualled, and expensive as that is, I think it's a job worth doing.
I was going to mention there, what is your personal opinion from, because this came out at the end of January, that the Cónla said that it would support the building of bridges or tunnels across the Sounds of Harris and Barra, which I believe is a UK Parliament programme that is investigating this. You mentioned there just now that you support the buildings of Ferries and, Calmac and all that. What do you think of the suggestion that there could be or should be tunnels connecting from the bottom of Barra to the bottom of Harris?
Well, ultimately, it's for the people in these communities to decide if that's what they want. I mean, I think there is a particularly strong argument, not least because everyone acknowledges that the costs associated with running ferry services are now very high in terms of the money that the government puts in. There is a case that it's worth that investment. I think particularly somewhere like, for instance, the Sound of Harris, that would transform the transport links within the Western Isles if that was there. I suppose one of the obstacles in the way is that governments who do this in other parts of the world have borrowing powers, or they have oil funds, neither of which Scotland has. But the Scottish Government has committed recently to looking at these links, also looked at a link between Mull and the mainland, which in theory at least you could see that as having a benefit for ferry services from there out to other places. So yes, I'm very open to that one. I'm very happy to help campaign for it, and the government's certainly been examining it.
This criticism over projects, they've just taken too long, if they've happened at all, many people are taking that as a sign that the SNP government is taking its eye off the ball again and again. Now, the clue's in the name, they're saying, Scottish National Party. Are services as bad as they are under the SNP because of your party's relentless prioritisation of independence as their number one goal instead of properly delivering services? What do you say to that?
Well, I've just been asked in this interview, are we under prioritising independence? I'm now being asked, are we over prioritising it? So the SNP are a government. We have to govern. People can disagree with the way we govern. They're open to. They're perfectly entitled to criticise the way we govern. But we have to govern, and we have to do that at the same time as making a case as to why more things should be in the control of the people of Scotland, why more areas of policy should be in the control of the people of Scotland. That means independence. But I'm quite happy with the idea that the SNP does both, and I think we should do both.
Can I just interject just for a second? I was only just merely in referencing to the under-prioritising of independence. It was not from, I was only pointing it out from certain sects within the nationalist movement.
No, I appreciate that.
To my attention. So I just want to distinct that everyone has different points when it comes to independence. I just want to make what my point was clear in the question that I was asking you of.
Absolutely, Donald. That's fine, yeah.
In 2025, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously that the terms man and woman in the Equality Act 2010 refer to biological sex, gender identity, whichever way it's come from. So tell me about your own views on that, your own beliefs even, and what you think of the way the SNP has been handling it and is at the moment still fighting for something different in court.
Well, the Scottish Government accepts the court ruling, although the court ruling was about quite a specific thing about the meaning of those terms within a specific piece of UK legislation. But the Scottish Government completely accepts the ruling of the Supreme Court on that, and is working in all sorts of areas of government and public services to make sure that public services in Scotland comply with the law. I think that you will find that possibly debate in the Scottish Parliament got a little overtaken by this issue in the past. There are lots of other things going on in Scotland which are important, and I'm not saying this one isn't. But I don't think it's the focus of the election campaign in Scotland that we have, and I'm quite content to see the law observed in Scotland.
That's you've skimmed over it there. To what extent do you agree with the court's verdict, or is there?
I do agree with the court's verdict. I'm not disputing the court's verdict. So I do agree with the court's verdict.
So what you're saying is Nicola Sturgeon was completely wrong.
Well, there hadn't been a court ruling at the time you're talking about, which is when there was legislation going through the Scottish Parliament on something pretty specific, really mainly to do with the process for changing people's birth certificates and various other certification around people's gender. And there was legislation at the time, and everyone knows the history, and it was legislation that was eventually struck down in the UK, and the matter was, well, a separate matter, it should be said, was tested in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court wasn't testing the Scottish Parliament's legislation, it was testing UK legislation and the meaning of UK legislation, the Equalities Act. And the Scottish Government is completely accepting of that ruling, and I am completely accepting.
But it wasn't at the time, and you know that Nicola Sturgeon went on the record to say that self-identification was enough.
People are entitled, there's nothing illegal about either people or companies or governments challenging matters in the courts. The important thing is that they accept the ruling of the court, and the Scottish Government does.
So she was wrong, but...
I didn't think that at all.
But she was,
there's two different
prior to the court verdict...
There's two completely different issues here. So you're talking about...
I know. Yes, go on, sorry.
No, I'm saying that there's two separate issues here. I mean, one is I think you're referring to the Scottish Government's legislation around gender ID, and the other is the ruling of the Supreme Court, which was about UK legislation and what it meant. But as I say, the Scottish Government doesn't dispute any of what the court has found.
Okay, we're clear on that now. Donald.
Reform UK's rise in the opinion polls have demonstrated that recent establishment politics in Scotland have started to change. This can also be reflected in what we are seeing in England and Wales with the rise of Reform UK and the Green Party, and in Wales specifically, Plaid Cymru. My question is, what obstacles are you expecting to encounter from Reform UK specifically, as they are the newest party on the rise in Scotland, throughout the period of the 7th Scottish Parliament? And an additional question to ask to that, do you think Malcolm Offord would be a good First Minister?
I'll answer the last bit first. I don't know Lord Offord very well. I do know that he was very involved in a political party which made him a member of the House of Lords, and then very quickly after that made him a government minister. I don't think that's a good way for people to become government ministers. I think people, if they want to be in politics, should be elected. But in terms of reform itself, look, I understand why people have concerns about the state of politics in the UK, and people will often tell me that. But what I would say in defence of not so much politics but democracy is that if you don't like politicians, if you don't like me, you can get rid of us. And my fear about an organisation like Reform is I am not quite sure how committed to democracy they really are. And they've got very simple answers to problems that are undoubtedly out there, and some of them are pretty unsavoury answers. So I feel quite strongly that people should not vote for a party like Reform, because I think it leads somewhere quite unpleasant and quite dark.
There is the potential danger from the point of the SNP and other left-leaning parties in the Scottish Parliament. So the Conservatives and Reform could work together to form a government. This is albeit a coalition or competence and supply. Despite the ideological differences between the two parties, what do you think about that? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I don't know it's an interesting question, because the Conservatives haven't really answered what they would do about that. At the moment, it looks like, from all available evidence, that the Conservatives are going to lose an awful lot of their seats and become a very small party in the next Scottish Parliament. But I think I would just merely suppose really reiterate what I said, which is that people need to be really alive to the dangers of a party like Reform, which have got very, very easy answers about blaming groups in our society for all the ills of life round about us. And we just need to learn from the lessons of history about why that's not really a good idea and why we should not vote for a party like that. And I think it's incumbent on all other parties, whether they are Conservative or whether they're on the left. I think it's incumbent on all other parties just to come out and say that.
Would you consider more, how would you say, afraid to, not so much to work with, but afraid to combat? Would it be Reform or the Conservatives?
Who would I be afraid to in the political fray?
Combat in the political way, yes.
I'm not afraid of either of them. I think the Conservatives are on their way out in Scotland, and I think Reform, I think all the evidences are past their peak as well and are being found out. My hope is that, and indeed the evidence would seem to be that Reform are not having the effect in Scotland that they're having in other parts of the UK. But I'm certainly not complacent about them, and I'm certainly perfectly willing to take the fight to them. And as I've just said, I'm perfectly willing to say quite bluntly what I think of a party like Reform, and I think all politicians should.
I know that being the incumbent, there's a lot of questions. So, Ian, I've just got two more. I just want a simple yes or no question, if that's okay. I'll start. If the SNP were to return as the largest party again, albeit, let's just say in the scenario, without a majority, would the party be prepared to work with Scottish Greens again, albeit as confidence and supply, or a coalition to form the next government?
It's a very good question, Donald. I don't know the answer to that. The First Minister will have to take a decision in all the scenarios that could come up. But the SNP is going into this election, our aim is to win an overall majority. Our aim is to be the government again, if that's what the people vote for, and all the evidence is that they will. But our aim in this election is to get an overall majority and to create the pressure which happened in 2011 and can happen again to have an independence referendum. But in terms of other parties, I'm not going to second guess different scenarios or different outcomes of the election. We're in the election to win it.
And one last question. This is another question that came from a member of the public. And again, I'm just going to quote what they said exactly. Why have the SNP been complacent about education in Scotland?
Well, obviously, I would reject that charge. I mean, I think if you look at the outcomes in education in Scotland, if you look at the number of young people going on to positive destinations, if you look at the number of young people doing hires, if you look at the achievements in our schools, if you look at the achievements of our universities, I would reject the idea that we've somehow been complacent about that. But, you know, all governments have to learn and adapt and change. I think we've got an education system in Scotland that we can be and should be proud of.
Okay, that's all the questions I have for now. Ian, back to you.
You mentioned the First Minister there. So do you still think that John Swinney is the best leader that can be found among all these MSPs? And if he's not, who should it be? I mean, the favourites seem to be Stephen Flynn, Kate Forbes, if she can be persuaded to come back soon from being a mummy, and maybe Mary McCallan, I think, has been mentioned. Three possibles there. Maybe one of the longest serving members, that fellow Allan from the Western Isles. Who should it be?
Well, it certainly shouldn't and won't be me. Some of the people you've just mentioned are not even members of the Scottish Parliament. But yes, I think John Swinney is somebody of exceptional quality. I'm not just saying that because he's my boss. I've known John Swinney for long before I was a politician. And I've always been impressed by the fact that he's got a phenomenal work ethic. He's got a phenomenal decency as a human being. He's got a commitment to the ideas that he champions. And I have no doubt that the First Minister after the election is going to be John Swinney.
And do you think that Kate Forbes is the best First Minister we haven't got, as she was described in a newspaper the other day?
I think Kate Forbes is an exceptionally good politician and somebody who I respect and know. I was going to say my neighbouring constituencies. The Western Isles almost doesn't have neighbouring constituencies, but she's somebody that I work with closely and have a great deal of respect for. And she's given, I think, very sound reasons why it's very difficult. She's found it very difficult to balance everything in her life at once. It's not an easy life, travelling back and forth, and especially for someone with a young family. And those are the reasons that she's given, and I think those are the genuine reasons. But yes, I'm sure that we'll see her back in Scottish politics, or I hope we see her back in Scottish politics in the future.
Okay, Alasdair, you've had to put up with enough nonsense from us. So how about you tell us in about a minute or so why we should vote for you on May the 7th?
I hope people will vote for the SNP for a government that can provide the fresh start for independence. And I hope that people may vote for me because they recognise that I've been a hard-working MSP who's stood up for this constituency and tried to help the people here.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us, Alasdair, and we will wish you all the very best, as of course we do all the candidates in the forthcoming election. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Great. Okay, Maha.
We've